our society has a problem that was the same problem that Bani Israel had with Qaroon. The end of Surah Al-Qasas, you have the story of Qaroon. And the people, some of the people in Bani Israel, they were bedazzled by his wealth, right? And they had an incorrect interpretation of what that wealth meant. They thought that Qaroon's wealth was a sign of divine approval. And so they envied Qaroon and they wished to be like Qaroon. And then come to find out that in the end, it was all actually an indictment against him. The wealth was actually a punishment, and it was just building the case against him, and Allah kind of caused the earth to swallow him up in his home, and that was that, right? So that's the moment that we live in. We live in a very Qaroon moment in North America and in many places in the world. We look too much to wealth, and we respect it too much. We ask people that are wealthy, that are business leaders, that are entrepreneurs, things that we don't really belong asking them. They don't know. We ask them about religion. We ask them about God. We ask them about politics. They don't know. Why would they know anything about that? You know, if they know anything about business, if they actually did make their own fortunes and it wasn't just handed to them, you know, then that's their area of expertise. The fact that we ask such people theological questions in the first place shows that we have a problem, the same problem that Bani Israel has, that we look to these people who are, you know, big business leaders and moguls and entrepreneurs, and we put them on a pedestal that they don't deserve, first of all. Second of all, what are the kinds of answers that you get from such people when you ask them questions about theology or about God or about religion? You get the same stock answers that just float around in the, you know, kind of the post-Christian universe where people are really, they think that they're reacting to religion, and they think that religion is just man-made, and they think that, you know, God is this or God is that, or, you know, I'm spiritual but not religious and things like that. And they're really just reacting to Christianity because these are Christian spaces or post-Christian spaces, right? They want to talk about proof. They don't even know what proof is, right? Or if you're going to say, well, there's no proof for God or there's no proof for religion, well, you have to have a conversation first about what would be admissible proof, right? Just like if you come in a court of law and you say, well, this person who was accused of a crime, you know, he ate cereal that morning, and everybody else we've convicted ate cereal that morning, and so that, there you go, that proves it. Anybody would stop and say, wait a second, that's not proof. You know, eating cereal has nothing to do with the crime that's committed. It's just something that's incidental. Okay, well, you have to talk about proof first. Okay, what's acceptable proof and what's not? And then you have to make sure that you're being consistent and coherent, because a lot of people, what they do is, when it comes to information about science or information about the real world, quote unquote, the real world, they have an entirely different set of criteria for what they consider proof. Then, once we start talking about God, once we start talking about religion, once we start talking about the spirit, once we start talking about the faith, then all of a sudden we're extreme skeptics. We won't believe in anything. Okay, so really it's an issue of bias, and really it's an issue of paradigm. Okay, people who have a paradigm that is already biased against theology or theological truths or religion or revealed religions, right? They are going to all of a sudden become extreme skeptics, and they're not going to have nearly as much skepticism if you're to approach them and say, well, the latest scientific research says that this, that, and the third. They'll say, oh, that's really interesting. They're not going to look into the study. They're not going to say, where's the proof? They're not going to say, well, that study wasn't peer reviewed and it wasn't in this journal, it wasn't in that journal. They're going to usually accept it, you know, they're going to accept it, or they will tend to accept it with a lot less proof than if you approach them with a theological truth. And that's because they have a paradigm bias. They're biased towards one particular paradigm and not the other. So if we want theological answers, or if people are really serious about theological answers, you have to look for it in the right places, first of all. You have to ask people who have been thinking about these things already for thousands of years, right? And people who claim, okay, yeah, maybe you're not a believer. Maybe you're skeptical. Okay, but you don't go looking, you know, let's say you don't go looking for a fork in the garage, right? You look for a fork in the kitchen, okay? You don't go look to the business leaders to tell you about theology or to tell you about God or to tell you about religion. If you really want to know what people say about religion and theology and God and all these sorts of things, then you read about theology and you read about religion and you read about these sorts of things. If you get to the point where you're going to the right source to think about those sorts of things, then you have to make sure that you're being fair. And you have to make sure that you're not being biased. Ask yourself, what are my criteria for accepting this as true? What is proof in the first place? What would I accept? Are we really just saying it's empirical senses? Nobody lives like that. Everybody believes in things that can't be seen. You believe in love. Love can't be seen, right? Only the hardest materialists will say that all these things have to do with like the firing of neurons and like they're just material causes. But most people don't believe that, right? So if you're going to look in the right places to try to think about these things, then at least be fair. Ask yourself, what are my criteria for accepting something as true? What is proof in the first place? How would I recognize something as proof or not if I come across it? And then, Allah guides who he guides.